Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Before we get started, I would like to thank Prototype Prime for this amazing podcast space. We are joined here today by Tyce Miller of MobileMind, and we're going to interview him and learn all about his company culture experiences. Tyce, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Yep. Thanks for having me, first of all.
Yeah,
Very excited to be here.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, so my name's Tyce Miller. I'm the CEO of a company called MobileMind. What we do is we solve the challenge of school teachers ineffectively integrating technology into their teaching. And for the layman, we have developed essentially what's called a professional development or a training platform for teachers to adopt and effectively integrate Google. And so we are a big Google partner. For those of who are not familiar with that space, essentially with the advent of mobile and cloud technology, the pace and complexity is very different than what schools and teachers are used to. And so several years ago, what we noticed in previous lives was that adoption was stalling at the teacher level with all this new technology. And the traditional means of training teachers is very antiquated in the face of all this new stuff. So we set out to develop a cloud platform that addressed all the critical failure points of training and roll it out to school districts to provide teachers a better way to integrate that technology.
Awesome. So with like the massive amounts of technology shifts that we're having, you know, the teachers have to leverage that for a good classroom, and I'm sure students and parents are driving a lot of that need in a lot of way. I know as a parent, you know, I have to hope that my son or both of my boys bring home what they're supposed to do that day, whereas now I can go look it up online. I can say, here's what you didn't get done, and why didn't you get your homework done, or I can see their grades and other things like that. So then with that technology, there's a gap on training the teachers on using it all, essentially.
Yeah, and if you think about, and we don't have to go too deep on this, but
Sure.
but people often don't realize, think about it, it's the first time in history that we've rolled out productivity ecosystems like Microsoft Office or G Suite to schools. So in the corporate world, we know what a spreadsheet is, right?
Right.
So, but think about it like this. You've got teachers who don't know what the cloud is, and you've got teachers who do, and teachers who are in the middle. So we're rolling all this stuff, and we're saying, here you go. Here's your Chromebook. Here's your G Suite applications. Now go teach with it. That's a
Right.
whole different ballgame. So you have to really address each teacher's proficiency levels effectively so that they don't get overwhelmed, so that they can slowly understand the practical usage of these things in the classroom. And there's a lot of nuance to that, right? And so that's the challenge that we've been addressing, and yeah, we're having a good time with it. So
Awesome. Well, we're glad you're able to help all our teachers get that done so we can educate the children. As far as company culture is concerned, we want to dig back into your experiences and understand, some of the things you've been through. So when it comes to company culture, what is the best experience you can remember, best company culture experience that you've had outside of your own organization?
yeah, this is first of all, this is a really good time for us to be having this conversation because there's a lot of transition going on in my world, and this is an active thought that I have daily on how we want to, as we grow and scale, because we're very small and lean, and how do I want to define the way we behave with one another and our culture? What does that mean? And that changes, right? It changes just like we change through life. Your perception of it and how you engage with it is different. So, for example, I kind of look at the story of three different companies that I've worked for with vastly different cultures. Probably the best culture that I experienced doesn't mean it was the best work experience, but I think and a lot of people know this one if you're in the software world, is SaaS. SaaS is the world's largest privately held software company out of Cary, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Analytics. Was there?
And that's SaaS as in SAS.
SAS,
Yeah.
yes, not
Just to
software,
clarify
not software as a service.
Yeah, just to clarify for the listeners.
And nobody knows what it actually stands for statistical analysis software, I believe, and I forget, but I think that's right. But yeah, they're kind of known for, massages and doctor visits or free doctors. I mean, just just all of the company benefits, and then they really wrote the book as far as coders go. Now, I'm a longtime sales guy, right? So I'm a technology sales guy. That's my world. But for the other many employees there, 35-hour work weeks, mandatory, things like that, and just the way that people behave in a work-life balance. Now, sometimes it can get a little. It depends on what the mission of the company is, right? For me, that's not where we're at. It's not startup culture,
Right.
But I would say if you were to take just the full-on balance of just the benefits and just the thought behind everything on employee culture, they were probably the most cognizant of everything that they did, keeping the employee in mind.
Got it. And were they the one that you didn't work on Friday or something like that? I feel like they were the one I read about, maybe who had a shortened work week by design across the board or something like that.
I think it was the no more than for software developers. I think it was no more than 35 hours a week.
Gotcha.
And that's vastly different than what I was used to. Now on the sales side, it's a little different. They're like, yeah, you're not working. You're going to work till it gets done, right?
Right.
But so I didn't experience necessarily a lot of that. I did get a lot of good benefits. And I know that back when I was there was when Google was trying to set their culture and benefits and understanding what to do with employees. And they actually came out to SaaS, and a lot of what Google now has was modeled after the way SaaS did things.
Interesting.
So that was an experience of sort of the extreme of one side of a culture, right? And there's if that makes sense.
Yeah. So with that one side of one extreme, and we don't want you to name any names or anything, but what was the other extreme? What was the one where it was that's what I want to make sure not to do or never to work in again?
Well, I haven't actually had that. Okay. I would say
or maybe even some sub factor that came out where it's it was memorable that a company did something that just was counter to who you are.
Sure. And first of all, there's no disparaging necessarily in any company that I've worked for. I've worked for some brilliant people, and I think it's your culture. Well, let me just say this. What I don't think culture is, I don't think culture's pool tables and foosball tables and popsicles.
Yeah.
Right? Those are neat things that you get, but that is not what culture is. I think culture is often defined by the mission of the company itself. So if your mission as a company is to take over the market as fast as humanly possible, you're hiring very young people, everyone's working like crazy, and your end goal justifies the means, you may be light in certain areas, but you may be really good in others, right? You may not think about culture as much. You just think about, I don't care, get it done. A lot of negative reinforcement, things like that.
Right.
But at the same time, if that's your thing, that's your thing. I think it's important, and I don't mean to, I make mistakes all the time, so just let me throw that out there. I think it's important to have culture is defined by, the mission of the company, the leadership, and how we engage with one another and how we engage with our customers, right? So that is really, to me, what culture is our behavior to one another, and that can be derived by the mission. So that said, if you have a servant-minded leadership attitude and you want prosperity for your people and you still want to be a badass and go out and take over the market, I think that's where the balance is.
Gotcha.
So I have experienced some of that, but even the negative things that you experience, the adversity, fuels the learning, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if I've said it on the podcast before, but I know I was speaking with somebody about this. But like you said around, if you want to go take over a market and your mission aligns with it, then there's certain ways to get there. So I know Uber was an example where, they had a lot of bad cultural items that happened in the organization. But as an entrepreneur, what happened in the back of my mind was said, I'm not condoning anything that happened. I don't even know the whole story. But what I do know is, that's probably the person that had to be there to get them there that fast. And where they're trying to go now doesn't align with, their CEO. And of course, this is, old news, but I think there's a lot of that where it's you got to know the mission and who's going to get you there. And then when you get there, does it require somebody else? Does it require a new mission? Does it require a new culture? What's that pivot?
Yeah, and I mean, a great example with that would be, previous to MobileMind, I was an early AirWatch guy. And there are no two more brilliant people out there than John Marshall and Alan DeBerry. Alan DeBerry, the chairman, who also started Manhattan Associates, another big Atlanta software company back in the day. And those guys hired me, and you want to talk about walking into the whirlwind. And that truly is the model of that company is the Inside the Tornado model, if you've ever read that book. It's a very Microsoft, Oracle-centric, first to market. You've got to be the first mover, and you've got to produce and sell faster than anyone else so you can get to the end because you've got competitors, and you want to be the first one to win.
And that's Inside the Tornado?
Yeah, it's an old school book, but Inside the Tornado, and it's based on my old school Microsoft Oracle model. And there was a lot of those guys, nobody works harder than them. They're the hardest working men in show business, and they're two of the smartest people I've ever met. Are we the same people? No, not in a bad way, but we just have different objectives. And I think I'm not as like John. If you want to go over and just absolutely take something over, and they've got the formula for it.
Right.
And you learn a ton in that. And we had a lot of very, very young. And I also do think this shapes culture. In a company like that, when you're scaling as fast as they were, you get a lot of young employees. Like at one point, and I'm not dogging on millennials, I love them, I'll hire tons of them in, but I'm a little older. I had 50 millennials reporting to me at one time. And I always joke about this. It was a little bit of a culture shock for me. And that affected how I treat and behave them, which in turn is part of the culture itself. So sometimes on the outside, it would look like this is a really hardcore place. They got a lot of bad PR on Glassdoor. But on the other side, when the CEO building a company, you're like, okay, maybe it's annoying that you ask me for a raise every 30 days.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, that's I don't know where it's going with that, but anyway, that's kind of the take on.
What was your biggest misconception, like once you worked with millennials for a period of time? What was like something you shifted your mindset on? Because that's a common topic now, of course, with millennials.
Yeah, I think the thing with millennials that I've seen is there's this notion that you want to contribute to the world, right? I want to do something of value, something that matters. And often there's this disconnect in their mind that they're doing the mundane things. They sort of want to skip to the end and solve the world's problems. And I think for me, my articulating, at least to my team, was, these are the things you have to do to get there. You don't change the world, by boiling the ocean. You change the world one person at a time. So what kind of impact, which is a tactical impact you have to do daily that leads to that strategic goal? And, just come in, work hard, and you're going to be awesome. And I think a lot of the times with them is one of the best things from a guy who I'm sure people listen to, Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL.
Extreme Ownership.
Yeah, Extreme Ownership. Talks about, how do you be indispensable at your job? You be indispensable. That's
Right.
it. Just do it. Just get after it. And that was some of the things I had to learn is that some of the things that people would bring up to me, I'm like, what? I don't understand why this has even come up right now. So it was just learning kind of what was motivating them and sort of guiding them. And it's a little bit, I hate to sound like a cliche, but a little bit of tough love.
Yeah.
I'll give. And also I think what a lot of people don't do is I was real big and still am on giving something reward to someone without them asking for it. So a promotion or a raise or whatever without someone having to ask. Because what happens is when they start to learn that, they start to go, okay, this life does work this way. I'm being awesome and I didn't have to ask for something. And I think that's something, and I think that's a lot of companies' fault because sometimes they don't do that because they're cheap or they're not doing something. But you will get more out of your people if you do those types of things. And I think that's a very millennial thing too. Some of the best people I know, my best employees are millennials. I love them. I'd hire them again.
It's kind of like rewarding along the way, right? Not waiting for the once-a-year raise or whatever it is, but reinforcing that things are going well in a way.
Absolutely. And it's also that surprise. If you say, hey, by the way, just a heads up, just come in here for a minute, and by the way, this is not contrived. It needs to be earned, but you as a leader need to understand that you need to pay attention to that. So-and-so, and then you got to go fight for it, and you got to expend your own political capital to fight for it and say, look, the right thing to do is let's give this to him now, and then or her now, and then you give it to them, and they're like, what? Oh, what happened? You will earn loyalty that way. And again, it's not to be contrived, but that's the way that dynamic should work.
Gotcha. Love it. I think that's new. You know, we haven't heard that before from another interview, somebody we've interviewed. So awesome content. As far as your current company, what's your favorite aspect of culture in the company now in MobileMind?
Man, it's such a good question. I think freedom, and let me just give you a little bit of context. So I was always a software guy on an island, right? I could do whatever, remote, okay? And so manage my days, do whatever, as long as I crush my number, nobody cares, good to go.
Right.
And when I went to AirWatch, that was a very, so for every company up to AirWatch, I had kind of been that way. At AirWatch was a very in the office, it was that was a shock to me. I remember driving to the office going, I don't know what I did, this is a huge mistake. And so I had to get used to that. So I got into that mode of everyone needs to be here, and I sort of adopted that. And so I say that because when we started, not to get too in the weeds on this, but when we started MobileMind, I knew there was a business problem that I had seen at AirWatch, and we had all these AirWatch customers that we could do a lot of consulting services around to fix some problems. I left AirWatch. We were acquired by another company. And I said, okay, we're going to build a services company to start that so we can figure out this PD thing and crack the code. Because we didn't want to just throw darts and start developing software. Yeah. I knew that might be for a moment in time, but it was always about the mission and fuel to get us to where we could develop our own platform for PD. It sounds, by the way, easier said than done. About 1 million mistakes along the way, for the record. But the reason I say that is because the day that I started the company, we did have an office. I had to have more people. We had to support more things. So the culture was kind of a trickle over from the AirWatch stuff. And I was still, but over the next few years, I sort of got back into this feeling of, can we grow and scale with a little bit more freedom? Do we have to have space? Can we do something hybrid? What kind of employees are we hiring? And I think I've really would like to, and also the difference is that's a sort of, we want to hire thousands and thousands of people. I like military history, and I was in the military, so I think of like the Chinese wave, which is a doctrine of hiring tons, millions, flood the market with salespeople. Now we've moved into more of, I'm more adept at having a special forces team. I want individuals who can put the flag on the hill no matter where they're at, anytime. Don't ask me questions, just make it happen. And so that does affect how the culture is. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Well, do you think that, just for context, we get a lot of this. We are getting more and more customers, clients, prospects, people interviewing that have these hybrid teams. They came from the traditional space. They started off traditional, but then they went a little more mobile, or they just started a new business more mobile. Do you think, though, if somebody wants to set out to build a company like an AirWatch, a fast-growing company, do you think they have to have that office environment? Does it?
I do think if you are going to, and this isn't the only factor. First of all, let me say this. You can't do an AirWatch unless you've got a lot of money behind you.
Right,
okay?
Right.
And you because there's just, so whether you raise that money or you have it, that's just rapid scale. For me, we're a lean startup. We have angel funding and things like that, but we've had to be very smart about it. So that alone affects how you do things. And office space, if you don't need it, do I want to pay $4,000 a month, for office space when you're trying to keep, cash in the bank? So I think that's one thing. But I do think if there is a maturity level, if you are hiring people who, one, want to be in an office. A lot of times the younger folks, they want to be there. That's social and after work are blurred, right? So this is just their entire life is, it's not the 9 to 5. So I think some people want that, and more people want freedom. And I think you need to understand the type of employee you're hiring, and that's probably going to shape the physical elements of the culture: office, no office, co-working, that kind of thing. Yeah. For to give you an example, this will certainly surprise you. My number one person in the company, her and her better half, they are living in a van traveling all over the place, like literally. Right. And she'll do demos because we've been all over the country with certain things, but there's an actual thing called van life. Like people live and,
Right.
and they travel. And if that's what she wants to do, and that is an extreme case, but the technology is there, and do I trust her? Is she the hardest working person that I know? Absolutely. Is she brilliant? Yes. So what do I care?
Yeah.
You know,
As long as the results are met.
yeah, you know, there's a thing, yeah. Well, I'll let you go. And yes.
Well, this has come up a few times, but how do you come up with those results so that you are no longer bound by time and bound by, you know, somebody seeing you visually? Like traditionally, it was 9 to 5. Somebody came into office, you could see them, and you know, if you wanted to have oversight, yes, they could be playing on Facebook or whatever while you're not there and still be in the office, but you know, people had this feeling that they could see what they were doing. Whereas with the remote culture, what I find is you have to be very clear, remote, not only remote, but like non-time bound style, right? You can work whenever you need to work for the most part, unless you have client meetings. You know, how do you come up with the metrics in order to manage those people? Especially when they're not in sales or they're not in something that has a hard metric, you know, like a marketing resource.
Well, I think you have to establish, you know, what are those duties, and you have to attach quantifiable results. Everything should be results driven, and if the results are there, that's why one of the funniest things I always look for, if I ask somebody through an interview process, what's more important, effort or results? And if they say effort, red flag. And it's because people need to understand, you know, it's the outcome that you deliver. And if you give somebody the right direction and the right outcome, and you need to be clear on that, because if you don't, then that's where it breaks down. What do I have to measure them on? I don't know, because I don't know what they're supposed to be doing. You know, so I think if you have the quantifiable outcome, you know, sales is easy, but we produce video content. We have software dev dates. You know, we're constantly doing so many things that so many people are involved with. It's easy to measure those things. So the question I think people need to ask is, if I have an employee that I'm worried about, whether they should be doing something or not doing something, did you hire the right employee? You know, I mean, because people are, whether you're in the office or not, people are going to be doing whatever they want to do.
Right.
So that's
too accessible nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. So my last question for you is, at MobileMind, what is the one thing that you want to work on from a company culture perspective the most? Like, what's the biggest challenge? What's the upcoming thing that you really want to focus on?
Well, I think it's because we're starting to scale. I think that everything that we just talked about is going to come into play.
It's all going to come up.
And, you know, I had a guy.
That's the way things work.
Yeah.
Inside the tornado, right?
Right. Well, it's good and bad things, you know, come together. But I think, for example, I had a guy who we were talking about bringing on board, who was one of my top guys in a previous company. And he, a millennial, well, on the cusp,
right.
But whatever, he's one. So he said, man, I can't work at home. I got to have somewhere to go.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there will be some of that evolution of some of that hybrid where can we cohabitate, collaborate with one another, probably setting in. As we scale, you know, you do need to start reestablishing those cadences. When are we meeting? You know, if you have 5 people, that's one thing. You know,
right.
He's doing this, he's doing this. But now you need to put back in that leadership structure, and the culture can maintain, right? The culture a culture of freedom, a culture of results. You know, the thing is, and I do want to impart. And I'll give you know, Alan DeBerry credit, who told me this. There's 3 types of employees. There's an employee who's, you can, with the proper hand-holding and guidance, you can tell them what to do. And there's an employee that if you give them a task, no matter what you do, it's just not going to get done. And then there's the employee that if you tell them, hey, I just need this done, they're just going to make it happen. And especially in the startup world, that's what you need.
Yeah.
And there's I did a talk on this Tech Village about this. There's a book called A Message to Garcia. And it's a famous book. I'm not going to go on a thing, but I got it. Somebody gave it to me when I was in the Marines, and they said, hey, read this book. And it's about just making it happen. Most widely translated book, I think after the Bible, globally. I highly recommend anyone who's in the startup world, anyone who wants to get a definition of expectation of employee results and culture. It takes 20 minutes to read. If that, everyone should read it. But that is the the biggest thing that I think that, I will continue to instill, are you the type of person that could just make it happen? And yes, we're going to reward you with everything that you could possibly imagine, and we're going to have a good interaction. We're all going to go out and be badasses and try and take over the market, but still be good people, right? Do something bigger than ourselves. And I think if we can maintain that, but the challenges will be continue to try and maintain that at scale, and I'm sure there'll be some change along the way.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming out for the podcast.
Yeah, this is a blast. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, this has been the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Tyce, for coming on with MobileMind. Have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.